So it's completely off the books. No one really sees, it's very informal. No one knows these transfers that happen. The World Bank doesn't calculate it. And so if you have a company like PayPal or Venmo, saying, hey, should we go into Africa? Let's do this data analysis. You crunch the numbers aren't really there because they're all informal. But when you talk to the people, like, how are you moving money? It's there. So that's kind of the bet that we're playing on, which is we talk to people every day. We know what's happening on the ground, and we have the tech and resources and connections. So let's just build this. It's Africa's time. This upcoming decade is going to be huge. And yes, even if we are early, it's going to happen.
This is the Maverick Show, where you'll meet today's most interesting real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and world travelers, and learn the strategies and tactics they use to succeed. And now, here's your host, Matt Bowles.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Bowles. Welcome to the Maverick Show. My guest today is Majid Mujalid. He is the co-founder and president of Chipper Cash, the no-fee African cross-border payment startup that has been likened to the African version of PayPal. Chipper Cash just raised a $2.4 million seed round from renowned investors in Silicon Valley, including Hall of Fame quarterback Joe Montana's fund, after pitching the legendary football star directly. Born and raised in Accra, Ghana, Majid built Chipper Cash while traveling the world on the Remote Year program, and after launching in October 2018, Chipper Cash has already processed 500,000 transactions from more than 100,000 active users in its first 9 months of operation alone. Majid has built his company with a location-independent infrastructure and can run his business from anywhere in the world. Majid, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. This is really exciting, and I'm really happy to be here.
It's so good to have you here, man. We got to set the scene. We are doing this interview in person in your hometown of Accra, Ghana, and it is an honor to be here, my friend.
This just warms my heart. I mean, I just got here about 3 days ago, landed, straight from San Francisco. And so to be able to do this interview in my hometown is just one of the biggest blessings. So yeah.
Cheers to you, brother. We've just opened a bottle of South African Shiraz that we're going to be drinking through over the course of this episode, which is going to be an amazing conversation. And we should start with a little context of how you and I know each other. We've both done the Remote Year program. You and I have actually hung out in Colombia. We hung out in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and now we're hanging out in West Africa in your hometown of Accra, man. This is awesome.
Yeah. And when I met you back in Colombia, and it was just like, there is so much that I could learn from this guy. I remember we were sitting on the edge of that table. And I mean, yeah, just now that I hear that you are going to be here, this is exciting to see you.
Well, it's awesome to see you, man. And your story since we met until now is an incredible entrepreneurial story that I really want to get into. But it's been so fun. I've been here now in Accra for 2 weeks, and I have been so enamored with this city. It has been genuinely speaking, I've been to probably now almost 70 countries. And, this is one of the cities where, I just walked into it and I was immediately day after day, just completely enamored with the city. I mean, it's been, everything from the restaurants that I've been to, the beach parties that I've been to, the nightlife. I mean, just how incredibly friendly and wonderful the people are just, walking along the street that you interact with. I mean, it has really, really been a very special, very heartwarming experience for me.
I'm really glad to hear that. So, I left the country back when I was 16. And so I've always wondered, I got to see the country from, an outside perspective and I always wondered what it would be like for a foreigner who comes into Accra. What is that perspective that they see? And so just hearing your experience firsthand, it's like we've got a lot going for us here in Accra. And, the world should notice it even more than it does now. So that's been, exciting that you've had such an amazing experience so far.
And I've been telling people about it, and I will continue to tell people about it. It is one of my highest recommendations in Africa for sure, and one of my highest recommendations in the world as well, by extension. But, it's a situation where oftentimes the best things that have happened here, I just wander into them by accident. I'm like wandering on the beach on a Sunday, right? On a Sunday afternoon, sit down on the beach, which, by the way, are pristine, clean, white sand, gorgeous beaches. The weather here every day has been perfect and amazing. And wandering on the beach, sit down, have a drink. And while you're chilling on the beach in the afternoon, more and more people start coming to the beach. And then the sun sets, and you've literally got lines of, restaurant after restaurant after restaurant, bars/restaurants. And they've all got their own DJs and their own sound systems, right? So you've got I don't know how many restaurants there are, 20 or so in a row. And they've got DJs that are just bumping amazing music, right? I mean, most of it's Ghanaian music mixed in with reggae, some of it coming from Nigeria, some of it from the Caribbean. And just thousands of people come and congregate and have this unbelievable beach party. So by the time the sun goes down, which the sun sets here pretty early in this time of year, so maybe by 7 p.m., the sun is down and there are, 5,000 people partying on the beach to these DJs.
Yeah, that's just amazing. For context, he's referring to Labadi Beach, which, growing up here, that was the beach that I went to just go swim in the ocean with the family. And just, those two dynamics are just awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then the nightclubs have been absolutely incredible. Amazing DJs. A bunch of them are outdoor venues, which is really, really cool.
The weather is always amazing in Accra. It gets hot, but it's usually especially at nighttime, it's just perfect, t-shirt weather.
Yeah. And then you've got, I love Indian food. It's one of the types of foods globally that I love. And so one of the things I did in Accra is I looked up, Indian food. I roll into this Indian restaurant in Accra. It's called Heritage. If anybody comes, you should go to it. And it was literally, outside of India and maybe outside of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, some of the best Indian food I've ever had anywhere in the world. I was like, where is this? Chef is from Hyderabad, right? But they do it so perfectly. I literally have been going there 3 times a week. We just ordered a delivery order of $150 worth of Indian food from this restaurant. It just stocked our fridge for the whole week. I mean, it's just amazing. So the Ghanaian food is fantastic, right? We've been to Buka. We've been to some of the local restaurants, but also the other international cuisine. Yeah.
It's on point.
It's amazing.
Ghana is definitely one of those gateway countries into Africa. And so we get a lot of foreigners come in, to set up shop, set up business. It's super safe. And so there's definitely a huge rise of, the international cuisine and all sorts of international businesses, really.
Yeah, it's amazing just how, as you said, how safe it feels, how clean it is, and just it's. I've been completely enamored, and each day just having new experiences, which is I'm like, wow, this is incredible. So it's been an amazing 2 weeks, and I'm definitely going to be, telling everybody and recommending they come to Accra.
Super glad to hear this. This really warms my heart.
For sure, man. So, well, let's get into your journey a little bit, Majid. You were born and raised here in Accra, and then what I want to ask you, just to sort of start off with, is to ask you about your entrepreneurial tendencies growing up. A lot of different people have different paths to getting into entrepreneurship, but as you were growing up, maybe you could talk a little bit about, where you grew up, and also as you were coming up, what were your entrepreneurial tendencies?
Yeah, so I was born and raised right here in Accra, in Ghana. And I would say my whole life, I've definitely been on that, a builder category. So I think probably the engineers among your audience, I'll probably relate more to them. I would break toys and fix them and put them back. That's the classic. And I think the first time I ever sold something was actually in my middle school, which is literally a 2-minute drive from where we're recording this podcast right now. My mother, she worked at the customs, and so she had a bunch of candy that she'd bring home, and these are mountains of candy. We cannot eat all in the family, and so I'll take a whole bag of those to school. And I had a friend, and I'd work with a friend, and we'd just sell them to the students, and then would actually make money. And it's no way, this is my mom did not know that we're doing this, so I was basically stealing these candies and selling them. And that was the first one. We were in grade 3, grade 4 about the time, and then then, a couple of grades later, I think that was when internet cafes started becoming a thing right here in Accra. And so what we'll do is we'll go online and download these like Pokemon ROMs, put them on floppy disk drives, and then sell them to the students because they didn't have access to the internet. It's like product arbitrage, basically. And we had a whole list and catalog of all these games that you could get. I mean, these are people who cannot, buy a Game Boy Advance, but they have a computer at home. And so, yeah, that was the second thing. And it was just, reselling stuff that you download online. But isn't Accra totally legal? So I've always been in the spectrum where, just like building things. And then I think after going to high school, that was when I went on a high school exchange program in Michigan. So that was the first time that I finally got the chance to leave the country. And so in there, I basically loved just being in the US. I love snow. I love the cold. I was kind of tired of like the African heat and African sun. And so I loved the experience, came back home. I used to want to be a doctor because, when you're in this part of the world, it's like you better be a doctor or a lawyer. That's like the thing. But then after I, went back to the United States for college, I went out to Grinnell College, Iowa. That was where, my advisor at the time said, I wanted to take all sciences. And she was like, no, you cannot take all sciences. You have to be more liberal. And so I could only take one math class. And then I somehow stumbled upon, this computer science program. My first job was at the help desk. And so it was literally the same thing where, people come in, they're sick with their Macs and with their laptops, and I fix it and they're happy and healthy again. And it's like, wait, I give people this feeling as if I was a doctor without going to school for 8 years. So that was the transition into realizing that I could build things using technology. And that kind of kicked off, actually building stuff.
So I first of all got to ask you, my business partner, Valerie, is from Michigan. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, where exactly in Michigan was your study abroad experience and what was that like for you?
The high school, it was in North Muskegon.
Okay.
So it was right, I'm pointing on my hand doing the classic Michigan.
Right.
And yeah, I was the only like black kid in that school. And so this, I represented an entire continent for many people who had never spoken to anyone from Africa, right? They asked you the questions, how did you get here? Did you swim? Really, I wonder if they're joking or they're being serious. But a lot of them really didn't know. And so getting that experience and realizing, being the face of Africa kind of started at that age for a group of people. So that was exciting to see that, you could, spread the word about what's happening back home because people just don't know. All they see is what's in the media, which most of it is not true. And there is an amazing life, as you had just described right here. So
yeah, it's, Accra is unbelievable. We're all going to go out tonight. We got a whole crew, about like 8 people or so. We're going to be for dinner in a few hours and then hit the clubs after that. So it's just, my experience here is just snowballing and it just gets more amazing every day. But for you, okay, so you had that experience studying abroad here. And then what was the college transition like for you? And then after college, what was your career trajectory like from there?
Right. So in college, we, as I mentioned, studying computer science. So I always wanted to start a company, a product. But because you're a college student who is international, you can't actually do that. So we started a student group in the college where it was called Grinnell App Dev. And we basically made apps for the college. And we got the college investor committee to invest in us. It was about 150 grand, trained students. And so that was the beginning of building things. And then after college, this is actually where I met my co-founders for Chipper Cash. And then after college, went out to join the Yahoo mobile team. This was when Yahoo was basically buying all sorts of mobile startups. So I worked on Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Mail, and then worked on Flickr. And then after that, Imager just raised about 40 million. Imager is a startup that, you can watch all these memes and just basically make your day better by just basically watching memes, which was amazing. And so I worked there on the mobile team as well for about 3 years. And it was in between Imager that I had this life, where I had to basically leave the country because the H-1B visa was a lottery. And even though Imager wanted me and I wanted to stay, there was no way to do it because random number, generator about to decide your fate.
And so from there, what happened? And maybe explain a little bit about that, for people that aren't familiar with how that H-1B visa situation works. But, how did that all go down? And then how did you respond to the outcome of that? What was your next move?
Right. So the H-1B visa is essentially a work visa lottery, and there are only about 65,000 of these spots in the US, and an extra 20,000 if you have a master's degree. And I only had a bachelor's, so I was in the 65,000 spot. And essentially the company applies and you get selected, and usually about 300, 400,000 applications. So it's basically 6 months, and this is not just me. Every single immigrant out there in the US who's trying to get a visa goes through this, where you have 6 months to a year of dread. You don't know if you're going to be selected, and you start to think about your life out of the US. So in my case, it was looking at all the options. Should I go back to grad school? Can I start a company and get a visa through that? Basically all the options. And one of those options were, okay, maybe I cannot stay in the US. Let me do something like remote year. And so remote year was a plan B. That was how I ended up deciding to do it. So I applied as a joke. It's just like, it's a plan B. But, fast forward that, it was the best thing that ever happened. So I kept my job. I pitched Imager on doing something like remote year, traveling the world while still working for them. And then while they were doing that, they would also, would try and figure out a way to bring me back in the country. And so I got to travel the world. We got to work with like really good lawyers. It was a lot of hard work though. And then eventually I got to go back to the US.
Well, I want to hear about the remote year experience for you in general. I mean, just for people that aren't familiar with that, this is basically a 12-month work travel program where working professionals can travel the world for a year and live in a different city each month of that year with a community of 50 or so people that all travel together. So the company Remote Year takes care of all your accommodations and airfare and access to co-working space and Wi-Fi and everything else, and has community events planned for you. And you basically go with the same community for an entire year. So the Remote Year cohort that you went with was 1 month ahead of mine.
That's right.
You were in Ikigai, I was in Libertatum, and we were sort of trailing you guys for the second half of the year. But it was cool because we did some joint interactions. So I met some people from your group, and you met some people from my group, and then you ended up hanging out with our group for the entire month after yours finished in Buenos Aires, I think, and staying on.
That's actually right.
Yeah. So we had a blast. There was a lot of interaction there and stuff. But I wanted to ask you, I mean, how was the remote year experience for you in general, in terms of, the travel and the community experience and all that kind of stuff? And then also business wise, I'm curious about how you developed and built Chipper Cash while you were traveling the world.
Yeah. So to set the context right, I was a kid who had just graduated out of college and doing everything that I could to stay in the US. When I told my parents about remote year, they're like, this is ridiculous. You better stay in the US. Like, why are you going to travel and leave after 8 years of trying so hard to make it work in this country? And so, it's a month in a different city. So we start off in Lisbon. And I remember that flight going to Lisbon, I was literally, it was a one-way ticket, right? So I was just devastated. It just felt like my professional life was over, because what's going to happen after remote year? Now, I'm also with a Ghanaian passport, which means you have to apply for a visa essentially for every country. So there's so much uncertainty if I could even complete the program or do the program, or how do I apply for a visa to Colombia, to Argentina? What happens in Europe when all these side trips are happening? And so just a constant state of uncertainty throughout. And I think that's one of those grounding factors, which is in life, you have uncertainty no matter what, and people just don't know it, but you do have a ton of uncertainty. And sometimes you just have to deal with it and be like present with that, and sort of like, just, you got to make it work. You have no choice. And so that was basically that beginning of remote year where I just felt like I'm screwed. But as soon as the program started, as soon as you meet all these, 50 crazy people who have given up a lot to travel, a lot of them are, working remotely, making things work. That sort of environment just like constantly fills you. It's literally a day-to-day interaction, and it fills you on. And a lot of people quit their jobs to start their own companies, because there's sort of life where you could travel and make things work. There's nothing like it, really. So that grounds you in a way that throughout the program, I had always been thinking about my whole life, really, like, how can I do things, for my home country, for my home continent? And one of the things that after you travel the world for a bit, you will notice what works in certain countries and what doesn't work, what's possible here is just a huge source of inspiration. And so, with payments, really, in Germany, super heavy on cash. You cross the border up to Denmark, Norway, it's all cards. They don't accept cash. And, even in Brazil and Colombia, just had that treatment on like digital payments all over the world. You notice what's possible. And then, you know that back home is just like super heavy on cash as well, but we haven't even tried to digitize a lot. I mean, mobile money is huge and it's gotten us to a certain point, but where we need to go in the next 10 years, you need something more modern, more foolproof, and you've had this inspiration to draw off while you're traveling. So that was a huge part of remote. Yeah, I was still working in Madrid, but I was, basically moonlighting. That's what they call it on the side, and building Chipper Cash, just like an hour a day, right? Like this is what you have to do if you're doing something part-time. You just work on it 30 minutes a day. And that showing up every single day to work on what you want to work on part-time, helps a lot. I can remember this because I think I was on a train from Sofia, Bulgaria to Serbia. And there were these, amazing rocks. It was basically a hill of rocks. Like they look like crystal shining rocks. And that was on my right side. And then I was amazed looking at it. And the guy behind me, he mentioned, you know what? It isn't the power of the waves, but it's the frequency. Day after day, these waves are hitting the rocks. And that's what causes such a beauty for miles and miles and miles on end. And that just, it was like, that's it. It's just the 1%. Every single day, you got to just show up and make something 1% better. So that was how I was able to build Chipper Cash, really the core of it while traveling. It was like, okay, today I'm just going to comment on this code. Whatever it is, like every day I will touch this code base, even if I just wrote, one line. And so that adds up because that's a 1%.
That's amazing. That's really important advice as well, I think, for aspiring entrepreneurs who have a full-time job in terms of how to do that and eventually how to transition. I want to start off, before we talk about the next steps and the transition and the evolution of Chipper Cash from there, I want to ask you to sort of more clearly identify the problem that you are solving. For example, I came to Africa. I've been in Africa now for 4 months, right? I was in Cape Town for 2 months. I was in Lagos, Nigeria for a month. I've been in Accra for almost a month. I'm going to go on to Senegal and all of that. So I'm spending a bunch of time in Africa this year. And one of the things that I noticed pretty quickly is that when you need to send money to someone to pay for something, I'm like, oh, do you take PayPal? No. Nope. Nobody on the continent of Africa takes PayPal. You can't use these types of services here to send money. It is incredibly difficult to transfer money on this continent, right? And so I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit about, that issue, how you identified the problem, and then how you went about architecting a solution for it. What is Chipper Cash?
Right. So let's start with the problem. And the problem is today, 2019, it's incredible, like you just described, to move money, across the continent within Africa. So if I lived in Kenya, I'm trying to send money to Uganda, it's just incredibly high. If I'm trying to send it to Ghana, you just probably have no way. I mean, even literally Western Union will not let you send money out of Ghana, which is kind of ridiculous. Why we don't have that Pan-African system, essentially transfer-wise for Africa. Internally within the country, you do have, mobile money, which is, it started with M-Pesa, and it's been, cloned in all sorts of African countries. And so that helps with the inter-country movement, but it's mostly just P2P style payments. But yeah, Africa is the most expensive country to send money to, also to send money within. And so when you see what's possible in terms of, like in, Sweden, the Swish, US, this Venmo, we send money to each other with no fees. It's you just assume that you link your bank accounts, you send money, and you're done. Out here, even if you were sending like $1, relative, you pay a fee of about 30 cents, right? Like this quote that is expensive to be poor is that if you're sending lower, you pay more in fees percentage-wise, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And so what we're doing with Chipper Cash, a lot of it is idea arbitrage in a way, which is we have a life that we take for granted in the US with PayPal, with Venmo, with Square Cash, and all these services. Why don't we have that for Africa? There's no reasons why we shouldn't. In fact, I was listening to a podcast about the Venmo founders, and they described how when they were building Venmo, they kept wondering, why hasn't this been done? They kept waiting, someone's going to stop us. 2 years later, they're still building. Someone's going to stop us. Nobody stopped them. And they just kept building this product. And now that I'm learning more about this space, because I think, why has anyone done it? There's probably some regulatory reason why. But no, it's just that nobody's done it. And actually, maybe I'll sidetrack this to a conversation that I had one time with a guy at MIT, which is very relevant for where we are today. There's this quote when, maybe climate change. This is such a hard problem to solve. And most people, at least here in Accra, would say, well, there's some smart kid at MIT trying to solve it. But then when you talk to an MIT kid, it's like, are people solving this problem? And the answer is no. Like, there's no one. If people are supposed to be solving this problem, there's no one solving it. So we're basically screwed. And because you're there, you feel that, okay, someone has to solve it. So you pick it upon yourself to do it. I think there's that we need on the continent where people know problems here. And now I'm back home, a lot of people complain. Things are broken. But it really is upon people to just get up and try and solve it when you see that problem, and not expect someone on the other side or, some white person to try and solve it. And then many of these are just small problems. So with Chipper Cash, it's, I met my co-founders in Grinnell. We had worked together. We had an amazing working relationship. In fact, part of the original idea was on this road trip that I took with my co-founder, Ham. He's from Uganda. This was, Route 1, California. So it was a good road trip where we talked about these ideas. That was the initial inspiring, point, to have someone on the east side. I'm on the west side. We all have, our sense of communities. Let's band together and actually solve this problem of moving money, within our countries. And so that kicked it off. Also, just having the right people around you who, this is a problem on our continent. Let's just solve it. We don't know what's going to happen. None of us have payments experiences. We don't work at a bank. We just build software. We just love building things that are useful. And every day after day, we're learning something new. Things are breaking. Customers are like, why isn't this working? But because the payment infrastructure is also really bad, you live and learn. And so, but then part of the 1%, right? You just got to make it better, and you just got to keep going. You don't need to see the end. You just need to see the next step, and you just keep going. And it's a slog. It's really a slog, especially on the continent, but you just keep going, and you know that you're going to get there. That's really been that, at least so far with the Chipper Cash story, that's been the journey so far.
That's amazing, because that is a really gigantic problem that you guys are attempting to solve. I mean, the contribution and the solution that you're envisioning, offering, proposing, and now delivering is really, really substantive and significant. So can you talk about how Chipper Cash then evolved and then came to the point where you were able to launch and go live and then start raising investment capital? What was that process like?
As I mentioned, we were building this while I was traveling on remote year, completely on the side. So it initially started, I was the main developer on it. It initially started as a web app that we could then just share the link out to people. And my co-founder had a partner in Uganda, a friend who ran an aggregator service. And so we could then hook into that service and just proof of concept, see if this worked. And so one of the key things was getting a prototype that kind of worked, but it was extremely clunky. It was straight up this is horrible, but let's see if this works. And then this was actually back in probably January of 2018. And I shared it with a couple of friends, and they were like, why would I use this? This is not going to work. I don't even have a friend in Uganda to send money to. Now, this is my personal friend, so of course they may not have anyone in a foreign country. But, and same story from my co-founder's side, which is he shared it to people, and it's like, no one's going to use this, it makes no sense, because this is a fundamental human need to move money. We're just talking to the wrong people. And so, but then we kept showing it to people, and then you just get this 1-2 people who are, they realize oh my God, I've been looking for this my whole life. I'm glad you guys are working on this. And literally that 1-2 people start to fuel that. So that was, it was downhill, and then it sort of went uphill when you met the people who needed it. And then, so we had a prototype out there. And then actually my co-founder quit his job at Facebook. And so he came to stay with me in San Francisco. I was still working part-time at Imager. And that kicked off a lot because now he's like, this is a huge problem. At this point, we had about 20 users. And then he came full-time on it. And that pushed the whole process forward because now that he could actually, reach out to investors, we started trying to raise money for about 4 months. And at this point, I was working on native apps. And then so we pushed it out there. And now when it goes from a website to an app, there's just something conceptual about those two that, oh, this is an app on my phone. Okay, this is more legit than a website. So that is actually what started getting people to try it and use it, try some small transactions here and there, try a little bit of the cross-border piece. And they're like, no fees, cross-border, this actually worked. And for many people, if you have a service, a new service that interfaces with a service that you already know, that just lit the fire. And then people started sharing with each other. And this was still 100% bootstrapped at this point. And so it's like, okay, this is growing. We're paying all these fees because we're covering the fees. There are fees. We're just covering it the exact same way Venmo and PayPal will cover the fees. But it was not sustainable to be bootstrapped at that point, which is, personally, I would love to do a bootstrap company. But for the kind of product that we're trying to build, you really do need to have investors. And so that's when that's my co-founder, and I started pitching a couple of investors. This was in September in 2018. And then we just kept pitching, and a lot of it was just like, Africa is awesome. There's a lot of growth ahead, but we're not there yet. But I mean, we're doing this and we see these numbers going up. We hear the story. And the way people transfer money across the border right now is this system called Hawala transfers, right? Where you tell someone, if you're in Kenya, you tell someone in Uganda, hey, I just need to send money to this person. If you send it over to that person, I here in Kenya will send it over to whoever you want. So it's completely off the books. No one really sees, it's very informal. No one knows these transfers that happen. The World Bank doesn't calculate it. And so if you have a company like PayPal or Venmo, saying, hey, should we go into Africa? Let's do this data analysis. You crunch the numbers aren't really there because they're all informal, right? And so bottom line is like, it's not there. It's not ready. But when you talk to the people, like, how are you moving money? It's there. And so that's kind of the bet that we're playing on, which is we talk to people every day. We know what's happening on the ground, and we have the tech and resources and connections. So let's just, build this. And so we started pitching investors and spreading that story that, it's Africa's time. This upcoming decade is going to be huge. And yes, even if we are early, it's going to happen. This is inevitable. So you better just basically get on. And I mean, we see it in the product. And just to continue on with the investors, there's this thing called the African discount, which we didn't know about, but we started to see where even if you have an amazing product, because it's Africa, this doesn't matter whether you're black or white, because it's Africa, investors just automatically slash your valuation. And it's like, well, they assume that everything's just cheap, which, as you're aware of being here, not everything is cheap. And so there's a lot of fight in that, discussions that we had to do to sort of raise that awareness that it's not that cheap. There are high margins in this industry. And that was a battle, but we probably talked to maybe over 70 different investors. But at some point, what happened was that we got an introduction to someone at 500 Startups, and that's how we then got to pitch this guy. And he was like, the program's already started, but I could see a promise here. Therefore, you know what? I'm going to let you start late. So we started 500 Startups almost halfway through. It had already started.
Can you say, just for people that don't know, what is 500 Startups? What do they do? And then how did you get involved with the program, and then how your experience was?
Right, yeah. And so 500 Startups it's an accelerator. They actually worldwide, they have, accelerators in Thailand, Vietnam, and a bunch of other countries. And so they had a program in San Francisco. And what they do is you apply, you get accepted. They give you about $150,000 for 7% of your company. And the whole purpose is you are here to grow. And so they have a lot of mentors, a ton of mentors. You have weekly calls, bi-weekly calls. And the purpose is to just, grow the company and give you all the help that you need, right? And so we were, for our batch, winter 2018, we were the only African startup in that batch. So those mentors that we had in there and the growth that we experienced, that was really when things started taking off with Chipper Cash. And, just having someone say, you know what, I could see something here. I'm going to let you join, even though it's late. I remember that, when he said that, I was like, no way, like this is actually happening. So that was when, I finally had to let go at Imager. I mean, they had done so much for me, right? They brought me back to the US basically. So that was also a bit hard, but at the same time, there's just something ahead that I cannot not do. And so that kicked up the process. We got into 500. We started hiring, a team on the ground and just went into build mode.
And can you talk a little bit about, I want to ask you a number of business questions in terms of how you built and scaled, but just to stay with the investment pitching experience and when you went in to raise your seed round, can you talk about that experience? We mentioned in the introduction that your company, I think it was your co-founder, actually got to pitch Hall of Fame quarterback Joe Montana directly. And TechCrunch did a whole article about it and everything. But can you just share a little bit about that experience and the whole process of raising and closing that seed round?
Yeah. So it's one of those things that you don't know it's going to happen. And yes, we had gotten to 500 startups and we had some funding, but it was depleting like a fallen rock, like I said, because we're covering the fees. So you see the bank account just dwindling. And once you're on the VC track, it's all about raising money. Like, it's not about being bootstrapped. You have to just go big or go home. So your bank account's depleted, but you're supposed to raise money in about a month. And you know that if you don't do this in 3 weeks, you're done. Like, it's done. Like, you've got this growth, but a lot of investors are like, we like what you're doing, but and so that was the atmosphere and the vibe that we were in. And we had not much sleep. Like, I'm working on the core product. Ham, my co-founder, crazy trooper. This guy is driving, going everywhere, doing the pitch. And I would come in on the second conversation because some of the first ones are just dots. It's just, oh, okay, well, let's just meet this guy. Let's meet what's happening. And so usually in the second conversations, even the second conversations, you just hear like, okay, we like what you're doing. Some people say yes, and then it just trail along. Some, and there's a whole East Coast versus West Coast investors where in the West Coast, if they don't like what you're doing, they just take their phones out. They don't tell you no. If it's an East Coast investor who's flying in, he like dominates the conversation and just like asks questions. But when you pitch in an investor, you should be the one like dominating and saying this is what we're doing. Obviously, it's a conversation. So get into the tail end of it. It just felt like it wasn't going to happen. And you're mentally thinking, well, maybe this is not going to work out because we actually do need to raise money. Yes, we could try and slow things down, but like we are growing. So why is everyone saying no? And so you do have that self-doubt because if this was amazing, obviously everyone should be in it. And what it took really after multiple no's was one investor, our lead investors, ended up saying yes. And it was this like unbelievable, no way, like that's not happening. And you just, they could say yes, but it's not really a yes unless the money's in the bank. And so you just praying that nothing goes wrong in the process. You're completing due diligence. He interviews, Alan from Imager, like a bunch of people that I know and, on Ham's side as well, doing the pretty solid due diligence. And we're hoping that nothing, scares him off, quite frankly. But it ends up pulling through. It ends up working out. And it's almost like, you're trying to swim in this water and finally you're above the surface and you can breathe. But you're still in this water and now you have to like swim to the shore. So, it's like you're in the clear, but not really. It was a roller coaster of its own because this is part of that, what I mentioned in the beginning, uncertainty. You just don't know what's going to happen, but you're just going to take it one day at a time. Like that core of what Remote Year taught me really is essentially what fundraising was like.
Right. That's amazing. And so after you had those investors on board and you had Joe Montana's fund and you had other high profile investors from Silicon Valley on board as part of your seed round, and you raised the 2.4 million at that point, what then was your business scaling process from there? What was the next step for you guys?
So at that point, now that we know we've gone from 0 to 1, at least internally, we know that we're gonna, we have funds to push this forward. We have the story as well. That article kicked off a ton of, people on the ground in Africa saying, you are one of those stories. Like, there are not that many African founded and, being in the Valley. And also, like I'm back home in Ghana and like just pushing this product on the ground and also being a face to the outside world. So you can feel the pressure. We opened an office in Kenya. So Kenya is our home base in Nairobi because that is mobile money mecca for the continent. That's why M-Pesa started. And we started to hire a team out there. Engineering is pretty distributed. So all of our engineers are remote. And we started essentially because everyone at this point was working part-time, just like I was. So now that we actually have money, it's like everyone came on full-time and we started paying them like actual market salaries, which... these are people who are going to do it anyways because they believe in the mission. Like, we need this on the continent. And so it's like getting paid for them to do what they're already doing, which was great. And they're the most hardworking, loyal, like amazing engineers that I've ever worked with. And so they're all remote. We have an engineer out in Berlin, one in South Africa, one in New York, one in Ghana. And so part of now the funding's closed, it's we can actually now meet other cost part because everyone's full time and really, see what's happening in the various countries. So we're essentially doing like a mini remote year, but for the team and having a roll in headquarters, within the country where we just travel out to Ghana, to Kenya, to Uganda, see what's happening with the product because this is a global product. Everyone on the continent is going to use this at some point. At least that's our goal. And so you want to be connected. And so that's why it's important to travel and experience different cultures. And so we started to scale the engineering team and operations teams out because we are a digital only service. That also makes it easier. And that is part of the ethos, being digital only, because you can actually do this from anywhere. So customer support helps, even though they live in Kenya right now, they help all the customers everywhere else. And so,
can you just explain also the profit model for the business? Because you initially have mentioned here that you guys are covering the fees in order to be able to offer free service, in order to be able to build your customer base and get people to use it. But obviously, to get the investment dollars, you guys got to show a really viable profit model. So can you just sort of explain how that works or how it will work?
Yeah, it's super simple. So for consumers, no fee. And so if you're sending money locally within the country, there's no fee. If you're sending money cross-border, there may be a exchange rate fee in that transaction because it's multiple currencies. And then on the merchant side, that's where we'll add the fee. So it's essentially just like PayPal, where consumers no fee, but on the merchant integrations, if you're trying to accept payments for your website, there will be a tiny fee on that.
Got it. And so let me just ask you this now from business perspective. As you are hiring your distributed team, how are you going about hiring the right people and building the right team? What are your hiring practices? What types of tips do you have for hiring based on your experience so far?
Right. So I'll definitely preface that with saying at the stage of the company, so we're about 20 people right now, a lot of the hiring is internal. It's who do you know and who do you trust? This is all about money. And we have an open policy. So people have access to everything because we're early. And so a lot of it has been, who are internal connections. This is just classic for any, early stage company, which is where we're at right now. What we do look for, however, is, the ability to communicate in written form because we do work remotely. Most of our communications are in Slack. That's what we use. So can we communicate with you in that way? I've seen some interview practices where, given that we work remotely, can I chat with you on Slack rather than doing a phone call over Skype because our time is spent in Slack? And so there's a lot of that within the engineering side. And just, how much do you believe in this mission as well? Because at some point, you're going to be doing overtime. This is a slog, right? Like, just at some point, it's not even about the money. So what is that belief that you have for, interconnect in Africa? And that's another big one. I am a big believer of travel for that, purely inspiration move. So if you are someone who cares about traveling, cares about a culture that isn't yours, that's also a huge one because you're 7 people of different cultures, different, different ways of thinking. Like some people ask the same questions in different ways. We use intercom in the app, and so you're interacting with different people in different African countries, and so that also empathy is another huge one.
Wow, that's really amazing. How do you manage a distributed team and run your operations and coordinate, project management across different countries, different time zones, all that kind of stuff? How do you run a internationally distributed operation?
That is a tough one, and I don't think we figured it out just yet. But when I'm in San Francisco, for example, purely on the time zone side, I mean, I would have calls at 2 a.m. sometimes, 6 a.m., because you have to make it work with, the other part of the world. On the engineering side, in product and engineering side, like I mentioned, it's a lot of it has to be in written form. And so, for example, in engineering, we have this process called spec-driven development, where if you're going to work on something, you just first write this like more detailed spec in Google Docs. It's shared out with everyone. And so all the work is not done in silos. It's when it's done, it's posted in Slack and everyone gets to see it. If you're one person, right, this is all in your head, you don't really need to write this out. But when you're a group and as a team is scaling, we've noticed that even the, operations folks needs to know what's happening in engineering. If you're all in one single office, you just hear the conversations casually. So that's never a problem. But when you're remote, how can you recreate that? And so if we've built a process internally where the way we work by de facto standard makes everyone else be involved, even if it's just marginal on the side. And so a lot more is just written down, and that helps in onboarding new hires, because once you join on, you have a literally list of like, here's the history of work that's gone on, and here's where we are today, and you can catch up by yourself. I noticed this when I went remote from Imager. I was actually probably the second remote person at Imager at the time. And interestingly, because I was remote, I was looking out for any single documentation, and there was a lot of it. But while I was on the ground, I never read it because I was right there. But when you're remote, you start looking out for things, and I feel like I learned more about the company being on the outside because you're just like digging in. And so we at Chippercash tried to, we were remote first. And so everyone has this culture of writing things out. And that process is both for operations, engineering, across the board.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree entirely on running remote businesses in that way. Let me ask you this, just business vision wise, I mean, to the extent that you can share this stuff, do you have plans to do another round, to do another investment raise? And as a company, have you guys thought specifically about an ideal exit strategy? Are you eventually, ideally, looking to get acquired and sell this to a larger company of some kind? Are you looking to go public with the company down the road? Are the investors that are on board looking for a particular exit strategy? What is sort of your vision there in terms of the future? To the extent that you're allowed to share any of that, feel free to answer that however you like.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I can definitely talk, especially on the personal side, which is because this hasn't been done before, what we want is to just make this happen. That's kind of the primary goal. I know it is right, like just the standard thing to do to know what your exit is when you're entering into a business. But at our point, we're not really thinking about the exit so much as we're thinking about, can we just make this happen? But that's like step zero. I would say that for what we do, we do need to eventually raise more money or become profitable, because like I mentioned, we are free and we're about to kick off Chipper checkouts, which is where the merchants get on. And so there are plans eventually to potentially raise more money, and this is the standard across, companies at our stage. So that's in the works. And in terms of long tail exit, I don't think that we want a long tail exit as much as we want to build a sustainable thing that's just here forever that ends up powering a lot of companies. And that's really, really the goal, just to solve this payments infrastructure problem on the continent. And there is not really, probably an IPO potentially, but, that's to the extent that I know right now.
Awesome. Let me ask you this in terms of potential competition. You alluded a little bit earlier to why companies like PayPal have not already done what you're doing. Now that companies like PayPal, which are obviously insanely well-resourced and capitalized, right, have seen what you're doing, and they've seen or heard about your pitch, and they've seen other investors coming on board and agreeing with you in terms of the market that you've identified and the model that you've built to serve it. Is there a risk of those types of companies just deploying an insane amount of capital to try to replicate what you're doing and compete with you? How do you guys see the competition landscape moving forward?
So that is a fascinating question that I think about quite a bit, which is, why aren't other people seeing what we're seeing? And as I talk to more and more and more people, and I think I mentioned this before, if you look at the market from a data perspective, it's a black hole, right? Like, not to be figurative, but there is not much. There's a recent Facebook Libra announcement, which is another, I think, exciting piece for, trying to create a digital currency that transcends countries. And that's exciting. Now, I think this problem is so bad that if there were to be external companies coming in and deploying a ton of capital, I actually would be happy, because now it really means that the pie is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can pluck out your segment. I don't think we at Chipper Cash would be building a mobile wallet if there was an already existing mobile wallet that was cross-border and actually worked 100% of the time. We'd probably focus on another different segment. But in just looking at the market, it's like, I can't even do this basic thing. And the services out there that supposedly do it don't work. Therefore, that's the baseline. And there's just so much work that needs to happen on the front that I'm not too concerned about it. And here's the problem. I mean, there have been companies that tried what we're doing. Many of them gone under. Many of them shut down. And, some of the reasons are just the bad payments infrastructure. And that's really what we're trying to solve, which is this payments infrastructure problem, because you need a ton of engineering resources, as well as, just the people, the connections, just knowing on the ground and knowing how to do business in Africa, which you just need that combination, really. And so if an external company was to come in and try and do it, I welcome them, because we need to be in this battle. The battle's against cash, right? It's not really against even the mobile money telcos. It's really against getting more and more people into just digital ecosystem. And that problem, it's for the next decade, is just gonna get really tough.
Can you talk about your vision for Chipper Cash, let's say 10 years from now? I mean, ideally speaking, you guys crush it. More investors come on board. You're able to build what you want to build. What is your ideal vision for 10 years from now?
In 10 years, obviously, everyone's going to be using Chipper Cash. Everyone in Africa and the African diaspora. And I think right now, the average cost to move money into the continent on average is about 9%. That's going to go down to 2-3%. There are some corridors today. I think it's Hong Kong to the Philippines. There are some corridors where the cost is 1%. And part of that is just because there are competitors. I think, us rolling into this and inviting more people to compete is going to roll the number down, which is just going to be better for the people. And so we're going to have a cost-effective, super slick, super easy way to move money. So you're in San Francisco, you work as an engineer, wherever, you can move money home for the cheap. And we're not just losing money. This is a product for everyone to be able to have access to. And this is actually, this is 10 years. So I'm going to say, we're here in Accra. There is a road that, when I was young, we would drive over after church. And my mom would, buy us these ice cream packets. And every time we drove over this bridge, and there's a water lagoon beneath it. Now, quite frankly, it does not smell good, right? And so every time we drove over, I would hide my ice cream, because I don't want the smell of this filthy place to enter the ice cream. And when I see pictures of Shanghai and the progress that happened in Shanghai, you see these before and after shots. It's filthy dump, and it now looks like the skyscraper is this amazing, gorgeous place. You do know that it's not impossible for that to happen here. There's a lot of work, both on a people mentality level and just having tech that works to make it happen. But I do think, because I'm driving through, Accra today, and it's like, look at these palm trees. I mean, look at the greenness. Look at all this stuff. This could be gorgeous, but it's just not there right now. There are multiple reasons why, of course. People and technology. Those are two different problems. But I think in 10 years, we can start to work towards a track where, the Accra that you described at the beginning of this podcast becomes an even better version of it. And cheaper cash really at the bottom just helps to power a lot of fairness and equality amongst like everyone who lives here, not just in Accra, but in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Joburg, and in everywhere, basically, on the continent.
That's so amazing. And then people that come here as tourists would be able to use it as well while they're on the continent, spending time here to transfer money to whomever they need to?
Absolutely. And so when we mentioned that we want to support the African diaspora, that does mean that it will be open to basically someone with a foreign bank, which would include a tourist. So yes.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, because I need to start using this like immediately.
Get some Wakanda money.
Exactly. Awesome. Majid, I want to ask you now a little bit about some of your personal productivity habits as an entrepreneur. Can you talk a little bit about how you are able to be productive? I think in general, but also while you're traveling and you're in these new amazing places and these super cool cities or beautiful beaches and you want to go explore and do stuff and all of that. How are you able to be as productive as you are as an entrepreneur? Do you have morning routines? Do you have a particular day structure that works for you? What are your productivity techniques?
So I definitely have morning routines, and it's really simple. You roll out of bed, fall to the ground, and you do 2 push-ups. Mine's just really simple. The point would be when you do 2 push-ups, you end up doing 5, and you end up doing 10, and you end up doing 50. But you got to do that too. And so I always just start with 2. And if I'm done with the 2, I'm done with the 2. I stop. So mentally, I'm okay with it. There are days when I don't do those 2 push-ups and I just have a crap day. I'm just off because I never felt like I did something that morning. And that's as basic as it is for my morning routine. The goal, to help this, when I do travel, it doesn't matter where I am. I don't need a gym. I just need a floor. And so it is everywhere that I go. And it's just, again, 1%. Other than that, this role is definitely stressful because things are breaking a lot because of the bad fundamental infrastructure. And so it gets really stressful. But when I'm not working, and there are times where I just need to just get away from everything. And I just love to dance. So while I was traveling on remote year, I was out in Buenos Aires, and the bachata actually out there is really good. And in Brazil, there's this dance called Brazilian Zouk, which is relatively new. It's about 5 years old in the United States, started to make its way around the world. And that is probably one of my favorite partner dances. And I could talk about how much dance is a huge stress reliever. You're not in your left brain head about problems. You're in the moment for, just 3 minutes with whoever you're dancing with. The music just fills your body. You are working out. You are meditated. You are, practicing something that you otherwise just wouldn't. You're not thinking about money at that point. It's just you and the person that you're with and dancing. And that's been pretty much the core thing. And every culture, every country you go to has that. So I'm able to do that no matter what. Best part, you don't need to speak the local language. And so you meet people as well when you're dancing. So that is one of the things that, being location independent, being that you can go anywhere, just bonds you with the local community. And it has all these extra pleasures. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I remember you and I actually did together a tango class in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
That's right. That was a good time. That I had never done tango, and so that was also another experiment where. And that's the thing about dancing, where you feel like you're pushing yourself to try something that's hard, but then you feel rewarded at the end of it because oh, I actually got this move right, and as basic as it is.
One of the partner dances that I've been watching, I haven't actually taken lessons or participated in yet here in West Africa, is Kizomba. And I think you do kizomba as well, right? Can you share a little bit about what that is for people that don't know and talk a little bit about it and what it means to you?
Right. So kizomba is actually known as the African tango, colloquially. It was founded in Angola, and then it made its way to Lisbon in Portugal, and then went through Europe, and then now slowly spread into the US and South America. And it's typically a dance that you dance with your family, typically in especially in Angola. And out in Europe and the US, it is a partner dance. So you are with, girl and guy, lead and follow. And you are really close in that embrace. You have like literally 6 body parts of contact. And you all move in as one body together. And it's more about the togetherness and the earthiness of the dance. It's just about, we're here right now in this moment. That's what it is. And so when you're dancing like that with, your mother or a close friend or, someone you met on the dance floor, that just being still and being you is really apparent in the dance, and it just grounds you because of that earthiness of it.
That's awesome. And I know you and I also both have a shared love for Brazil and for the city of Sao Paulo in particular. I'm always talking about Brazil on this podcast. People know that I love it. But can you talk a little bit about what your experience in Brazil and in Sao Paulo in particular was like and why you love that city so much?
Yeah. So I went to Brazil because in Buenos Aires, I was told that in Brazil, there's this dance called Brazilian Zouk that I had never tried. And so I got an Airbnb literally a block from the dance studio. And my whole thought was I was going to work and dance. That's it. And the thing about Brazil, it really is the people. So I got there at this class and literally everyone, those 2 people start to pull you. And it's like, oh, you're from Ghana. Like, and it's this welcome and like, why don't you join us while we go into this restaurant, meet my new friends, meet my sister, right? And she wasn't a sister. She was just another, friend from Colombia. But that sort of family aspect of Brazil where you feel like you're one of them, even though you're obviously not. You have an instant family when you moved out there. So I thought I was going to just spend a week in Sao Paulo. I ended up spending a month because of the people and because of that welcoming atmosphere, welcoming vibe, and just learning a new dance that I had never tried before. That combination was just spot on. I think other people have, different perspectives on Sao Paulo. Mine was through a dance lens because that's literally all I did almost every night. And so I definitely want to go back and experience some of the other stuff, like the graffiti, the art, just other things that were Brazil that wasn't dance, but that was why I went. And so that grounded that experience.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I didn't actually take any dance classes while I was in Brazil, although would love to go back and do that, exactly what you did. But the music and the dancing is so infused into the culture. I would just be wandering around by myself alone on a Saturday, and you just run into like street parties where DJs are playing and people have just taken over an entire street, and there's just a massive block-long outdoor party going on. And it's just, this is Brazil, right? This isn't... Now, I've been to Rio for Carnival. I've lived in Rio for a couple months, right? But this is like not just during Carnival or not just during a festival. This is just a Saturday. People in Brazil, it's just how they roll. It's just part of their culture. It's what they do. And so like my experience is very similar to what you describe. Even though I've never taken any classes, I just walk around in the streets and I just see this stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, the street art and the food. And I'm always just so enamored when I go to Brazil. And the country is so enormous. Just geographically speaking, it's so huge. Like, I feel like I've been to Brazil 3 times now. And I feel like I've only seen a tiny fraction of it, And wherever you go in Brazil, it's very, very diverse geographical landscape, very different types of experiences that you could have. But each time I go there, I'm just like, oh, Brazil. This is why. Now I remember why I like Brazil so much. I just get there. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I have the 10-year visa for Brazil.
Yo, I'm jealous. I got 3 months.
Well, I can only be there, I think, for 3 months, and then I have to be out after that. But then I can come back, and it's a 10-year thing where I can be there, I think, 180 days out of the year. You're like 90 in, 90 out, 90 in, 90 out if I wanted to. And I feel like I should be taking more advantage of that because Brazil is amazing. Awesome. So I would just want to ask you also about travel in general for you. Can you talk a little bit about why you travel, what you love about travel, what travel has meant to you.
Yeah. And so I definitely did the bulk of traveling during that remote year period where I was essentially waiting and figuring out ways to get back. I mean, if I could summarize remote year into one word, it's freedom. And really, that's why many people do a lot of things to be free. And the thing with travel, and when you're, a tourist in a different country, you can get away with so much. It's like, I just didn't know. And therefore, but like you could explore a lot. You could go anywhere and you could essentially reinvent yourself on almost a weekly basis. That process of like exploring who you are as a person is the core of it. Because when you go out to a foreign country and you have a new experience that's never happened, you were describing what happened out, when you were in Lagos. It's just a new experience. You're like, I don't know what to do, and you just have to figure it out. It's like, I don't swim, but it's kind of like you're just thrown in a swimming pool and it's just like figure it out, and you have to happen over and over and over and over again. So there's a lot of personal development that happens, in these new things you experience. And for me, it's a combination of that and the freedom to be able to just do it, right? I'd been living in San Francisco for, the past 6 months and you're working on cheaper cash, but definitely that routine sort of sets in on a physical level where it's like I am doing the same physical things, but yeah, there are the stresses of it. But for travel, it's just constant inspiration, constant exploration, constant questioning of who are you right now, who are you going to be next week, who could you be, that you are, and you're not even thinking about it, but it's happening to you. That's why I think everyone at some point needs to go through that kind of experience and constantly actually go through it, because it just makes you naturally, question a lot.
I agree with that entirely. And I find myself in those situations all the time. And a lot of times that's the point, right? Is to catapult yourself into uncomfortable, unfamiliar situations where you may not even speak the language or be able to, everything is different. And then you need to figure things out. And sometimes intentionally putting yourself into situations where you're uncomfortable and you don't know how to do the stuff that there is to do is sort of the point, right?
No, yeah. Like your environment controls a lot. And so if you're able to change your environment, in a controlled fashion, of course, by changing the country, you just naturally, no matter what, you would learn a lot about yourself.
And you just learn so much about the different cultures. I mean, we were talking about Brazil and even just, coming here to Accra in Ghana. And for me, it's just been amazing just to see and just to be so inspired and enamored. And at the same time that you might put yourself into a situation where there's discomfort or, you don't know how to do this and you have to figure things out and you feel like a child, at the same time there's that, but at the same time there's also, feeling just so enamored and just like inspired by what you're seeing, what you're experiencing around you, and the music and the people and the landscape and the scenery is different. And it's just so inspiring and amazing, and just the privilege to experience that and to learn about that and to learn about different cultures and different histories and all that kind of stuff in person on the ground in a place is just also amazing. So I feel like that whole combination together is just such an enriching and amazing thing.
That for sure. And that's actually why I ended up doing dance, because I was in Colombia. And salsa is, you cannot walk one block in Colombia without hearing the music. It's almost, I did not speak Spanish at the time. So if you wanted to meet a local, it kind of was through dancing. And that began that dance journey for me. And this idea of experiencing a culture that's not yours, but in an, intimate, deeper level, that's the only way. You just got to go there.
Right. And that's one of the reasons too, why I try to stay places for at least a month or so that you can really feel like you live there. And then you have your regular, people that know you at your regular coffee shop, and you're, shopping at the grocery store and doing normal local things, and you're actually living in a place. You're not just rolling through and staying in a tourist hotel and zipping around and taking selfies in front of statues and museums, right? I mean, you're actually living in a place, and you're finding your favorite, night spots and your favorite restaurants and your favorite coffee shops, and people get to know you. And
they know you by your name.
Yeah.
They're like yelling, "Hey, Matt, come on in."
Yeah.
And you just have your mini society, and you get that taste of what it's like to be there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a number of places in Accra right now that I could walk into, and everybody's going to be super excited to see me because they know me because I go there all the time, right? So creating those kind of experiences locally is just totally amazing. So awesome. All right, Majid, at this point, are you ready for the lightning round?
The lightning round. All right.
Let's do it, man. Take a sip of that wine, and we'll get it rolling.
The lightning round.
All right. What is one book that has influenced you over the years that you would most recommend to people?
I think it's a classic. Read it as 10-year-old, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
That's a good one. What is one app or productivity tool that you're currently using that you would recommend to people?
Whoa. So, I mean, I use Trello, both for personal and professional. There's an adrenaline rush from moving things from the left to the right. And it's just like, I literally write things I've already done. Like, I did 2 push-ups, move it to the right. And just the progress pushes you.
Awesome. What is one podcast you listen to, or blog that you read, or YouTube channel that you consume regularly that you would recommend people check out?
I really love the Jordan Harbinger show. I actually met Jordan Harbinger as well. And he's a great guy. And, I think after college, that was one of those frequent podcasts that I had, and just, hearing his opinions and about things and the people that guest he has on the show, it especially for just, as a man, it was one of those shows that grounded you in a way. So that is very versatile. It's about almost anything.
Cool. All right. If you could have dinner with any person that's currently living today that you've never met, it could be celebrity, author, public figure, business founder, athlete, movie star, anybody in the world currently living today, you and that person for an extended dinner, one-on-one conversation, who would you pick and why?
I would pick Satoshi Nakamoto. He's a parent person who founded Bitcoin. I want to know why he did that, or she, or they. I know they're an entity. That would be the one person.
So you'd have to figure out exactly who it is first and then have the dinner. That's amazing. That's a good pick. Because the question, right, is, allows you to choose fairly inaccessible people, right?
Right, yeah.
So that's a pretty good answer, right? Because you want to think about, who would I really not be able to get access to? And then you pick them for the answer of the question. So that's a really good answer. All right. Last 2 are travel questions. What are the top 3 travel destinations that you've been to that you would most recommend people check out? Top 3.
Top 3. Okay. Number 1, Colombia. We're in Medellin. I don't know if I have to say why, but it's just huge growth moments on multiple fronts. Number 2, I would pick Sweden. And that may be just because of who I am, where I'm from, and the diversity that I experienced when I was there. And number 3, just split Croatia. I'm a water person. Even though I don't swim, I just love to be by the beach and just be there. And so those will be my top 3.
Awesome. All right, last question. What are your top 3 bucket list destinations? So places that you've never been before that are the highest on your list right now you would most love to see.
Number 1 would be Japan. I've never been to Asia, and I think the Japanese culture is different from what I've ever seen. Number 2 would be India. There's a lot of stuff that happens in Africa, and this is also in Asia. I want to see those similarities, also even just on a product level, right? Paytm is huge over there. Interestingly, number 3 is China, but it's also a similar reason. And I mean, these are all Asia because I've never been out to Asia, but the Chinese culture and the African culture are very similar. It's almost like default no trust, but yet they've grown and expanded immensely. How do they do that? How can we replicate that over here? Want to just see it and feel it and like imbibe that, and then hopefully bring it back.
Awesome. Majid, it was so great having you on the show, my man. I want you to let people know, first of all, how they can learn more about Chipper Cash and how they can definitely use Chipper Cash if they're coming to the continent of Africa to visit as a tourist, or if they want to send money to Africa or between African countries or any of that kind of stuff. How do they learn more about and use Chipper Cash? And then also, how do they follow you personally on social media or connect with you and learn about what you're up to?
Yeah, you could download Chipper Cash straight from the App Store. It is free. CHIPPER space cash. You could also check out our website at chippercash.com. And I mean, I am on Twitter at Dr. Jid, DRJID. And you could reach out to me, shoot me an email, is my first name, at chippercash.com. Just mention that you were listening to the Maverick Show. I would love to talk to you, speak to you on Skype, just have a conversation with you. And so just hit me up.
Awesome. We are going to put all of that contact information in the show notes. So we're going to link everything up at themaverickshow.com. So you can just go to one place, go to the show notes for this episode, and we're going to have all of the links to everything we've mentioned on this show, as well as all of Majid's contact information there. Majid, thank you so much for being on the show, my man. This was a blast.
Matt, this was a huge pleasure. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Be sure to visit the show notes page at themaverickshow.com for direct links to all the books, people, and resources mentioned in this episode. You'll find all that and much more at themaverickshow.com.
Would you like to get Maverick Investor Group's white paper on real estate investing for digital nomads? How to buy U.S. rental properties from anywhere in the world and finance an epic international lifestyle? Just go to themaverickshow.com/nomad. The report is totally free and available for you now at themaverickshow.com/nomad.
If you like podcasts, you will love audiobooks, and you can get your first one for free at themaverickshow.com/audiobook. Whether you want the